Well, that was a tough act to follow, I think, especially some of the observations toward the end. And I really appreciated your thoughts, especially since we do beef marketing in the U.S. That's what we do at the Cattlemen's Beef Board. I thought I was going to get really excited when I saw that you had Beef It's What's for Dinner up there. It was our bumper stickers and our campaign, and then you said it was old and tired, and then I was a little bit upset, but that's okay. I might get over it. We have a great panel for you this morning to talk about yesterday, today, and tomorrow in sustainability. You'll recognize many of the names up here. I will do brief introductions, but they probably don't need it. Each speaker will have a few minutes to introduce him or herself and give you some initial thoughts, and then we'll head straight into the questions because that's always the fun part anyway. We will go in the following order. We have Jacques de Groot, who started in 1989 with the VanDrie group as head of R&D nutrition of veal calves. Most recently, he's the head of quality assurance, where he oversees both quality control and assurance throughout the chain. But within the last year, the group has elevated priorities on animal health programs, animal welfare, and sustainability, so he is lucky enough to be able to direct those programs for his group. Second, you'll hear from Deborah Perkins, who is the managing director of Rabobank International Dallas office. You also shared, I believe, some data from Rabobank that I've talked to Debbie this morning about, and I think you'll find very interesting as the questions come up. In this role, she's involved in financing large U.S. agribusiness companies, learning about their strategies and working with them to provide the necessary financial support to achieve their growth aspirations. She's originally from a wheat and sheep farm in Western Australia, so you can ask her about lamb and sheep as well if you want to. Mr. Francisco Beduschi, yes? Thank you very much. Neto holds an agronomy degree with a major in animal production and an MBA in agribusiness economy. After completing his MBA, he joined the Instituto Centro de Vida, ICV. Currently, he is project manager for the Initiative for Economic Incentives for Conservation. And then a man who probably needs no introduction, a past president of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Okay. He heads the Corporate Affairs Department at JBS. Prior to joining JBS, he served the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, where he managed livestock, dairy, food safety, ag policy, etc., for Chairman Saxby Chambliss. Of course, past president, so he knows this group very well, and I expect that we will hear some interesting things from him as well today. With no further ado, let's hear from Mr. de Groot for opening comments.
Polly, yes. Very much. It's an honor to present our roadmap towards sustainable veal this very morning. I felt a little bit squeezed like a lemon because Polly told me I have to do it within 7 minutes, so I have to limit myself for the most essential part. And the other day, Scott sent me a message, give me that much as practical examples as possible. So I will try to do this both. A short introduction about my company. I'm working for the VanDrie Group, and it's a world market leader in veal, calf skins and calf feed. And approximately more than 2,000 people are working in our units, and we have a turnover of more than 2 billion euros. Besides that, we have also permanent relations with contract farmers, approximately 1,500 farms. And that will introduce also our way of production. We have a chain production. That means that we have husbandries. We are hiring via contracts these husbandries. We are making our own dairy products as well as solid feed. We have our own slaughterhouses. We are producing calf skins. And that all these activities are integrated in a quality system, and it's called Safety Guard. And that gives information for our internal organization as well as for our customers if they are allowed for food safety, for tracking and tracing possibilities, animal welfare, responsible use for antibiotics as an example, and environmental management. We do this with 4 pillars. Jerry told you about 3, and there are other people who have 5. We have our own organization and 3 points: food safety, animal welfare, and surroundings and environment. We try, and we are able, to address the needs of critical consumers. You know, in Europe we have very critical consumers, and we try to meet the new and innovative way to address the global growing demand for animal proteins, energy and micronutrients. And also we are producing a complete veal. So that means that we have to evaluate all parts of the calf and the byproducts, including the parts who have no or little market in the Netherlands. We are a company without a one-liner. We don't communicate about status where we are. No, we have containers of indicators, and we are working on a continuous improvement. By efficiency, specialism, we're working on recycle management, and we are more or less linked to the dairy husbandry. And we call this system more or less a sustainable intensification. So, that's the part of Polly. Then I will start with the part of Scott. I give you, if I got time, 6 examples. I told you we have a complete management system, and all quality aspects for ISO or for animal welfare requirements are endorsed by our food safety supply chain. That means that every detail is monitored and registered through our chain. And that means that traceability can meet challenges. Holland is a very dense population. We have to look to all kinds of diseases, so it's very necessary to know where our animals are, what is their background. And also the food alerts, to a high extent, we have to meet all the challenges. So in fact, it's limit the damages, and for you as an illustration, we are producing in 2 weeks approximately 270,000 technical pieces in 60 countries. So without any traceability system, only a short period of unnecessary concern, we have to find out which of those parts are dangerous for our food chain. But there are pure opportunities. By traceability, we have quality promotion possibilities. And also internally, we have a system where we can evaluate the productivity of those items. I told you the Netherlands is more or less, well, a region. It's not a country, it's a region or a city. A city where some parts is with agricultural initiatives. So we have to be aware of what is our responsibility in terms of resistance. So we have a One Health approach, and also by antibiotic use. And the last years we have made a master plan, and where we can show the world that we have reduced our antibiotic use by 50%, and not with a reduction in animal welfare. I'm a producer of products with valuable ingredients. And it's not only protein, it's not only energy, it's also micronutrients. That's very important to know and to show and to communicate to the world. We know all we have challenges, and these are figures, more or less the truth. But we can show the world that we try to fill up the gaps for the protein and the energy demand. We have a responsibility of approximately 30% of the working people who are in the agricultural business. And we have a challenge of reducing the greenhouse gases. So, one message: produce, use nutrients wisely. This is a picture of the Wageningen University, which shows that the holistic view of the animal, or the production of animal protein can be very sustainable. And that fits also for beef production. So we can use this. And last, yesterday we visited some farms and we tasted or we smelled manure. This very morning you had breakfast and maybe the ladies are smelling something. Well, that's the smell of apple pie. But for you, I changed the ratio of volatile fatty acids of the manure, and then it smells like apple pie. So that's for you a trigger to see manure as a valuable product, not only for nitrogen or phosphorus, but even we can make a promotion and go to Coca-Cola and say, well, we have a valuable ingredient. We can go to Chanel and say, well, out of manure you can extract valuable products. Trigger for you. We are emphasizing our responsibility for transport, animal transport. And the last part is about animal welfare. We have developed a program with Wageningen University based on performance, animal performance things, and we can show the world how we are treating our animals. And that we can agree on objective animal performance indicators if we are treating animals well, yes or no. Another question is if you like it or not. Well, in the last, I'm a technician and I'm a European guy. And one of my bad habits is that I think I will produce sustainable. But when I look to the United States and Canada, I see you are communicating far much better than we do. Okay, there are questions. But we have to tell the world that we are part of the solution and not a part of the problem. That's all.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate here today. I'm very sorry that Leanne Saunders isn't here. She was not able to travel at the last minute. So for those of you who haven't heard who Rabobank is, we're a Dutch bank. If we're in the Netherlands, we do everything just like one of the major banks here in Canada or the United States. But outside of the Netherlands, our focus is on food and agribusiness. We are providing finance and information and networks to our customers and prospects, and we believe in sustainability. It's one of the important things to us as a European institution. So that means that we participate in a number of the roundtables, not just beef, but also palm oil, soy, cotton, sugar, and sustainable biofuels. It is an important part of what we do. However, when I started my banking career over 20 years ago, we were in a very different era. We were in an era where consumers thought that farmers were doing the right thing, they believed their food was safe, and sustainability was not really something that we formally focused on. Yes, we were banking the farmers that were going to survive a long time, those that were sustainable, but sustainability itself was not really a big focus for us as bankers. And we are in a very different era today. Today, consumers are getting all sorts of negative messages on social media, in the mainstream press, about all these negative things about agriculture, about where their food is coming from. And unfortunately, they're further and further away from where it is coming from than what they were in the past. If they don't actually know where their food is coming from, if they don't know how it's being produced, then they are going to believe to a degree some of these negative messages that they're hearing. And I think that it's important. They're listening to the messages. Those messages are not necessarily coming from you, the producers or the processors. They're coming from a wide range of different special interest groups. And so it is beholden on us that are doing so many positive things. I was privileged enough to go on the tour yesterday to see some of the really positive things that are being done here in the Canadian industry. There are similar things happening in Australia, in Brazil, in the US, and we need to find ways of getting these messages out to consumers, making them understand how their food is being produced, that it is positive for the environment. But as we move forward into the environment, change is going to happen quicker than it ever has in the past. We're going to see consumer tastes and trends changing much more quickly than they have historically. We're going to see changes in business models and the way that things are produced and what investment strategies are of companies. And we're going to have to work out how do we evolve and manage in that sort of environment. As a bank, we're obviously interested in the investment strategies of our customers and other investors in the environment. And many of you might have heard that just recently there was a coalition of 40 investors that are responsible for the investment of $1.25 trillion. They started a consortium. They got together 40 of the leading food and agribusiness company, or 16, there were 40 investors, got together 16 of the leading consumer food packaged goods companies and said, we don't believe that animal production is going to be sustainable in the long term. We want all of you to come up with alternative strategies of how you are going to source alternative sorts of protein for your companies going forward. This is something that we're going to have to deal with. What's really interesting here is they didn't go to any of the meat companies and say, we don't think what you're doing is right or wrong. They went to these other entities, companies and retailers that are closer to the consumer and said, this is something that we are concerned about and we want you to take your power and influence that you have to come up with alternative strategies. I think we all know that animal protein has a real important role to play going forward. So once again, it comes back to education, it comes back to communication. We need to find ways not just to let the consumer know about all the positive things that are happening in this role of continuous improvement, but also let the key food companies understand that. But I do believe that there is a reward for those companies that can get it right. David showed a statistic this morning that showed what had happened to US consumption between 2005 and 2015, and it was very negative. However, we did a report earlier this year and we looked at it, and he is quite correct. From 2005 to 2014, consumption did go down. Supplies were tight. But if you actually looked at what happened in 2015, meat consumption in the US increased by 5%. That was the largest increase that had ever occurred in the last 40 years. It happened because there was increased availability. That meant that the price went down, it became more affordable. And if we look forward to what's going to be happening in the medium term, there is going to be increased production of beef, pork and poultry. With that increased availability, we believe that there is going to be increased consumption of meat in the US. Some of it, yes, is going to go to growing markets, but there will also be increased consumption here in North America. However, consumers are concerned about where it's coming from, how it's being produced, and it's important on all of us to get those positive messages out there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk by the GTPS perspective. I don't know if many of you know, but GTPS was born before GRSB. We were born in 2007, and by that time we have really big problems inside, not only inside Brazil, but also inside GTPS. We spend most of our time fighting against each other and not working on solutions. And at the same time, we had problems inside Brazil in terms of deforestation and in terms of what people call slave labor or actual slave labor or something like that. We could only change our perspective and really working on productivity agenda when we start to set some points that we look at and say, yes, we have common problems inside the value chain, and we must work on it for a solution that is a consensus and works for everybody. So for us, nowadays, GTPS have representatives from the whole value chain and build this kind of solution is the way that we want to work. Nowadays, we have a system of governance that everybody can feel represented there. We have maturity, and we have established some strategic and working plans, and we can build solutions on these plans. And we could only do this because we have support from many guys, and I want to thank especially ProForest, Solidariedade, and Moore Foundation. Those guys really helped us on that time, and nowadays we can deliver some solutions for sustainability in Brazil. We have three main products that we deliver. Sustainability on the ground. We have 7 projects in 5 regions in Brazil, what is a huge challenge because Brazil is very big, not talking about Dutch, but please, we can fit 4 Dutch only inside Mato Grosso, so we have at least more complex problems there. And outside GTPS, we are doing our homework. In Brazil, we have a decrease in deforestation around 80%. 8% less deforestation when we look between the last 10 years. This is a big result for us. And also, we have 67% of our native forests preserved. This is also a big number for us. 2/3 of our territory, it is still preserved as native forests. And 1/3 of this preservation is done by farmers and ranchers. So we must be glad to them because they are doing their job, they are doing their part. Still so, we have many challenges for tomorrow. We have these products that we do inside GTPS. We have a manual, we have an indicators guidebook, but for tomorrow we must put these on the field and be sure that everybody in the whole value chain, everybody is using these as tools to decide and tools to be more sustainable each day, and we can raise the bar and have more sustainable production in Brazil. And also, we have some commitments that we've done as a government. We have 15 million hectares of pasture to recover in Brazil. We have 12 million hectares of area to reforest in Brazil. And also, we have all the FAO expectations of food production in Brazil, that must come from Brazil. 60% of food production increasing between today and 2015, the FAO expectations must come from Brazil. So we are in a huge challenge. We must match all these forest recovering, forest protection, and also food production for food safety for the whole world, not for only for Brazil. But at GTPS, we are very happy that we have those challenges, because at these times, I do remember Eduardo, president from GTPS, that was there before me. I think some of you remember him. He was our president during the last conference, GRSB conference. And he told us once, we must not be led, but we must lead this process. So I think that more than be part of the solution, we must lead the solution. We are the guys that must lead. We are the guys that are able to lead the solution for sustainable beef production. Thank you all.
Good morning. Good morning. How is everyone? Let's do a little audience participation here. So we saw this map where everybody's from. How many Aussies and Kiwis do we have in the audience? Let's see some hands. Okay, got a few. How many Europeans, not by ancestry, the whole room would raise their hand? Europeans? Okay. South Americans? Okay. North Americans? Oh my. Okay. Just Canadians? Okay. Now just Americans, and keep your hands raised. Keep your hand up if you're a Trump supporter. Just messing with you. So back in November of 2010, I believe it was, many of us in this room met in Denver, Colorado, for an informal conference on global beef sustainability, right? There was no global roundtable for sustainable beef, so it wasn't our first official conference at the time, but we all got together to talk about this challenge. And we wanted to come up with a way to address sustainability in a manner that made sense for all segments of the supply chain, of the value chain, from the producer to the consumer. And it was an awesome challenge. And we had environmentalists running all around the hotel telling us we were destroying the planet, and producers running around with shotguns trying to kill the environmentalists, and it was just a fight. But now as we come full circle now, almost 6 years later, we're enjoying our second global conference for sustainable beef, as presented by the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And one of the big challenges that we identified early on was, how do you address such a huge, all-encompassing issue, such as sustainability, in a manner that lets all of the players address that issue in a way that makes sense to them and their challenges? And so we said, we'll start this global roundtable, and then we'll promote the proliferation of regional roundtables. GTPS had already founded in 2008, I believe, or 9. So let's say 9. Okay. And then we founded the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And now we have a U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And today, Canada will make arguably one of the most significant announcements when it comes to a sustainable beef program in history. And people said we couldn't do this. They said roundtables are too unwieldy. You can't deal with beef in a way that can truly drive meaningful impact. You can't create a system that has relevance in Brazil, in the United States, in Australia, in Canada. But that is the exact journey that we are on. And I'm very proud of all the work that many of you in the room have done to accomplish that. But let's talk very quickly about sustainability, because I really enjoyed your presentation, Dr. Hughes. Here's Here's the challenge with sustainability that we all have to remember. The attainment of any single attribute does not make you sustainable. But the failure in any one area can make you unsustainable. And what we are seeing in the marketing space today are what I call these absence claims, these free-from claims, that often imply some health benefit when it does not exist. And we are creating this sustainability shorthand only for one reason. The issue is not hormones, it's not antibiotics, it's not free range, it's not grass-fed, it's lack of trust. And so people are trying to market trust through absence claims. They're trying to alleviate this lack of trust that the consumer has in us and me and you through marketing. And that creates a problem for agriculturalists because there is a difference between a marketer and an agriculturalist. A marketer will come up here on this stage, and someone may do it during this conference, they always do, and they'll say science does not matter. And if I'm a marketer, you're damn right, science does not matter. But if I am an agriculturalist, if I am a producer, stocker, a backgrounder, a packer, someone who deals with the live animals, someone who deals with the genetics, someone who every day is focused on greater efficiencies, greater productivity, greater animal welfare outcomes, then science means a lot. So how do we bridge this divide between the absence claim, free-from claim, meant to derive more value to a consumer because they don't have that fundamental trust in our industry, with the actual sustainability challenge of being more productive, being more concerned for the environment, the socioeconomic considerations of our industry, and actually produce a better product, a more sustainable future for everyone? How do we marry those two challenges? This is what we need to be focused on, because the absence claims will only get us so far. And when you peel back the absence claim and it doesn't achieve the sustainable outcomes that it's meant to promote, then we're further eroding trust. This is why JBS and many of you in this room love GRSB so much, because it does not look for shorthand when it comes to sustainability. There are 5 principles. There are 72 criteria. It is incredibly complex. It is incredibly nuanced. We know that just saying that something is free from does not mean it's sustainable. We know it's a balance. So how do we articulate to the consumers this complexity in a simple way that actually allows them to reward us by being loyal and purchasing our product, but while also deriving more sustainable outcomes rather than just marketing gains? This is our challenge. This is the next evolution for all of our roundtables, right? To promote the truth, to promote the progress, to promote more sustainable product, to arrive at a more sustainable future for everyone. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the introductions. If you would all turn on your mics, if they're not on already, so that you can answer questions for us. And everyone out there, get ready for the question session. There will be folks running around with mics, so if you have a question, then please let us know by standing up. But I'm going to start it off because, note to self, Scott, I might not be the best moderator in the world because I'm extremely passionate about these issues. So what I'm going to try to do is moderate and not soapbox, okay? I had written down when David was presenting, and he said this brilliant thing that I'll probably steal liberally. The margin is in the adjectives. What I had written down is the adjectives are due to loss of trust. And the reason that consumers move to the adjectives, to your point, is because they don't understand what we do, and at least if they know we don't do that, it's a better definition of getting their hands around what we do. So given that, I would be interested in all of your perspective on this idea of consumer trust, what some folks call social license. Consumers know that they have an increasing ability to impact our production methods. This is social license, yes, and they are executing that social license, I guess, in increasing ways. But to that point, we also have to have economic, environmental, sustainability. We got to survive economically, right? Because that's the only way we can continue. So if you all have thoughts on where that sweet spot between social license, the permission to produce food for consumers, which we need to continue, and economic viability, esoteric question, but if you all have some thoughts on that, I'd be interested in those. David, do you want to start off?
Okay. Yep. One. I can't see half the people. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So do all the adjectives reflect lack of trust? I don't think the free from reflect lack of trust. The story ones are not lack of trust. The story, who's the farmer, people want the story. They want to celebrate, particularly not for a Wednesday meal, but like weekend meals. We want the food to be the hero, the heroine. We want that old-fashioned round the table. Let's celebrate food and talk about it, and we're willing to pay for that. And I guess the point I made is wherever you get a premium paid for an attribute that you can't taste or see, then we'll have a problem in our industry, because there will be those that exploit that ruthlessly, and which breaks down trust. So that's yes, that's. What else do you want to say about that? Let me sit for the moment and think, and let some of these other guys have a go.
Who's next?
Yes, well, I'm not 60, so I'm consuming a lot of protein.
You're not converting well.
No, I have a bad converter.
Yeah.
Right. But when I was a kid, I knew where my food was coming from. And so I went to my grandfather and played with the chicken, and the next day I eat the same chicken. And I knew he has had a marvelous life. So I was satisfied, and my grandfather presented that particular chicken for me and my family. And that's what we have to do in a modern way, that we have to communicate that we are producing especially for David, or for Polly, or for you. And that's to find the best trick. And what we see in Europe, that when I'm walking in the retail organization, then it's indicated it's produced by a certain guy. I don't know if it's real boergijs, but it's mentioned over there. And suddenly I have some trust. There is some identification of that particular line. And say, okay, I will manage.
It's sort of interesting, though, because it is about trust. If I give you some European survey data, believe it or not, that where is the particular problem? The particular problem is in meat processing in Europe, where meat processors, one way or another, are seen as the least trusted group in industry, apart from second-hand car salesmen. And that's, it's not pretty, but that's a fact. Can you change that? You certainly can change that. In the UK, if you went back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, increasingly farmers were not trusted. Now, this was driven in part by a number of disasters, like, for example, mad cow disease, etc. What has been remarkable has been through the late 90s and the noughties, how that's turned around. And as I mentioned, and I didn't say it flippantly, how farmers have become increasingly fashionable. And people want to relate to them. And I know for certain, if I, without a meat hat on, but if I put my fresh berry hat on, that if we had an issue in fresh berries, a disease outbreak, or sort of bugs on the strawberries or whatever, that the way to get your message across was not to have some guy in a suit talk about it, not to have corporate talk about it, but to have a farmer talk about it in his or her field. Because the passion for what they do shines through, and people trust them. And so, yes, it's better communication, and you can get over difficult. I mean, clearly, in Europe, horse gate didn't help meat processors. And it takes a long time, just as Warren Buffett says, you know, you've built up all that goodwill and you can blow that just so damn quickly. It is about that. Trust is important.
Thoughts from the meat processing sector on?
Well, I think ultimately we have to come to a place where we're talking less about which technologies are removed from the product and more about what values were put into the product to get it to market, right? And that's not about hormones or antibiotics. It's about the farmer. It's about how you treat the animals. It's about how the product was actually produced and why it was produced that way. And ultimately, we have to give attribute claims to marketers and retailers that they can use that both benefit us and them, because there has to be profitability all along the chain. But until we better articulate these values on why we're doing the things that we're doing, then the marketers will be forced to make absence claims. And they're rewarded for it in the marketplace. I mean, just look at the quarterly returns, so it's not as if they're crazy. But we have to bridge that divide. And the onus is on us, and I think platforms like sustainability present a great way to articulate our narrative and get closer to consumers.
Debbie, what about the question of economic sustainability? I heard in David's presentation that green is not going to be a premium option for long. So how do we balance those?
I think, you know, that's right. But for any supply chain to work, ultimately all of the players in the supply chain need to be making a profit, and it needs to be working for all of them. Now, you know, beef, like a number of other ag commodities, is cyclical, so the amount of profitability will vary from time to time. But ultimately, the profit that is being earned needs to be throughout the value chain. So it has to work for producers, it has to work for the processors and the marketers and retailers as well.
There's a lovely non-beef example of that, which is in the chocolate industry, where the Nestlés, the Mondelez, the Cadburys of this world suddenly noticed over the last 5-7 years that in West Africa that the small-scale cocoa growers that dominate international coconut were slowly going out of business, and that they wouldn't have an industry if that continued. And I was actually last week working with Nestlé in the UK out of their chocolate factories, and the amount of money they have ploughed in to Côte d'Ivoire, to Ghana, etc., to small-scale cocoa growers has been just astonishing, and it just underlines that sort of economic sustainability right along the chain. Or you don't have an industry.
I look from the Brazilian perspective, and it's good to know that between us and Canadians that we visited yesterday, we have almost the same problems. We need to do more research, to learn more, and to communicate better, to build this trust between us and the consumer. We must have the academy with us, showing numbers and everything that the population can say, oh yes, I believe in them. The difference between us is only the perspective that you look to this problem. For example, in terms of the Brazilian producers, the Brazilian ranchers, they are, for the most part of the population in Brazil, they are the bad guys, because this population is not linked anymore with the production in Brazil. They are in São Paulo, they don't know about Mato Grosso, they think that we deforested everything in the Amazon, and they don't know, they just don't know, they don't have the information. And worse than that, they have a bad quality and misinformation circulating in all those social medias, telling about various problems. And they believe in it, and they reproduce this information. And when you reproduce this kind of information, and everybody's talking and talking and talking, it seems that this kind of information turns true information. So I think that communication and build this kind of trust and show what we are really doing on the field. We are preserving riparian areas. We have our own legal reserve inside our ranches and farms in Brazil. We are doing our job. We are implementing intensification inside the range, and this intensification decreases the carbon balance per kilo of meat in terms of 7 to 8% of decrease. 80% less carbon per kilo of meat produced. But we must find a way to deliver this information to the consumers so they can believe in us. And I think that bring the academy together with us is one way to do this so.
I think that's right. It's not just about communicating either. And this is an issue that isn't just for the beef industry. You know, the dairy industry, the pork industry have dealt with very similar things. You know, Fair Oaks Farms, which many of you might be aware of outside of Chicago, was set up for exactly that reason, to give people the opportunity to go and see, you know, how dairy cows were raised, how milk was being produced, you know, what they were doing. And they expanded that to pork. You can now go there and see a hog barn and see how pigs are being raised. But the pork industry sees this very as a real issue for them as well. You know, they've actively gone and courted a number of the bloggers. They've organised tours for those bloggers to go and actually go into hog-producing barns. And I know that, you know, some of the other processors here today have taken people into their plants to see it. But I think it should be easier in many ways for the beef industry to show their production methods to people than it is for some of the others. But I think it's something, it's hard, it takes time, but it is something that will make a difference. As David said, people are genuinely interested in the farmer who is producing that thing. And maybe as an industry, we could look for ways to actually give them the opportunity to see it firsthand, as opposed to just reading about it and hearing about it.
Yeah, it's true. And just an example, David showed us a number of liters of water that need to be consumed to have 1 kilo of beef. And in this point, in particular in Brazil, we must show that, yes, we have this amount of water, but 93% of this water is green water. It's water that comes from the rain, and it's inside the system and just don't go away. It's recycling in the system. So people sometimes get scared in some huge big numbers, and we must explain these numbers. And when we talk about communication, we must find a way that they understand and they feel comfortable with these. Like Cameron said, oh, okay, I feel comfortable. This is what I want to know or what I want to hear, so everything's okay.
Exactly. Same in Wales. It rains all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to go somewhere. And if it goes into grass, then that's not a bad way to use it.
Let's take a question from the audience right now. Scott's got one. No?
Hello. Ian McConnell, I'm the Global Beef Lead with WWF from down in Australia. I guess first a slight cautionary note. We're talking, and we often do when industry comes together, around communicating sustainability, and we start to point the finger at the consumer saying you don't understand what we do. And we talk about social license as a communication outcome. And the fact is we need to talk about sustainability because we need more sustainability to save the forests, to save our water. And by achieving those outcomes, we then have stories and data to tell that gives us social license. We need to be able to do sustainability, and I'll challenge David on the point he made. We don't have to do sustainability as a way of informing consumers. We have to do sustainability because the planet and the animals need it. We as producers, as industry, get the outcome of more trust by going down that path. But since we are talking about it, I'll ask a question. You're right in the fact farmers are cool. Czechs now go with ties. But the question, the image that resonates with producers is becoming more and more outdated. I'll give you an example. We had a very large corporate want to take some photos with a farming project in Australia, so he hopped on his new tractor, and they said, "Oh, that doesn't really work. Can you hop on the old tractor?" That's what resonates. All our photos are a farmer with a broad-brimmed hat on grass. So more often than not, when they see real modern farming, they're surprised. So how do we make the modern farmer cool? How do we make modern farming practices trusted in the same way that colloquial farmer, because more often our food needs to be, and is doing so for so many other reasons, environmental, economic, social, is becoming slightly different than what people imagine and actually want to buy. So how do we begin to update and modernise the image of that farmer so that the efficiencies and modern practices needed to feed 9 billion in 2050 are trusted?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It has two parts. I think I'm going to make a question out of your first part and then take a question out of the second part. And so what I heard you say was, and great point, I think we do tend to slip into talking about how we can talk about what we already do, rather than understanding that communication flow is a two-way street. In other words, they have the right and they will tell us what they want us to do. How can we find ways to improve? So I heard that, so take that down as mental note number one. And what I heard from number two was, how do we actually tell consumers what we're doing today rather than rely on our tried and true images of husbandry type of old-fashioned, I guess I want to say, farming, which we know work, so they're hard to move away from. So, two questions for you. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Great.
So this is evidence, Ian, why it's so good to have the panda bear in the room. Because, the NGOs keep the rest of us on task, and that's important. But I will say this, because this is a meeting of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and not the Global Packing Association, I think most of us in this room inherently, fundamentally agree that what we need to communicate is sustainable progress, not sustainable marketing. So if that was misperceived in my comments, I apologize. Obviously, we need to make on-the-ground improvements and then be able to communicate those improvements out to stakeholders so they can reward us for the good work that we do, not for the image we're trying to project.
Yep.
I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, if it's the guy at the back that was the WA guy, I think it's in our hands. That I couldn't agree more. You need modern farmers talking about what they do, and just again back to my experience with been involved with berry farmers. In the UK, like in many parts of the world, we don't grow strawberries in the fields. Well, yes, they are, but they're undercover. What's more, there's none in the ground now. They're on tables. And actually consumers are genuinely interested in that. And the fact that we're moving towards robotic picking and they understand the issues. And you could have a passionate, knowledgeable, influential, young or, older modern farmer. You've got to say to the media guys, no, we don't want the hayseed farmer. That's sort of yesteryear stuff. That's in our hands. I might say, and without being trivial, it helps enormously too if the farmer has been media trained, because out of 100 farmers, about 95 of them would put the fear of God into most consumers. You want somebody who can get the story across in a modern way, sure. And there are all sorts of vehicles for doing that now, through social media, etc. I think people want to know how things have been done. They expect us to move on.
I want to add, I agree with you both and Ian, of course. I just want to add one thing that I think that it's very important because as an NGO, we have a project in Alta Floresta region, north region of Mato Grosso. And from time to time, we have people visiting us. And when they are in the field, they really change their mind about beef production. So I think that Ian telling the stories it's the better way. How we're going to tell this story depends on the public that we are talking with. But one important point on this, and this is something that we always try to do, not only in ICV, but also at the GTPS, it's not to cover our problems. Mm-hmm. We cannot do this kind of thing. Yes, we have problems, but we have tools to solve these problems. And we are working on it. So we were down here. Nowadays we are here. And our goals for 2020 is here. So it's continuous improvement. But not cover problems. Please, if you do this, someone will find it and we will appoint to you some guy like we do this, and we always have this kind of example.
Okay, one more question. We have time for one more. Somebody has a mic. Yep, right here.
Can you hear me now? Hi. This is a question that I have for the panel. It's about the trustness that was broken between the customers and the industry. Why do you think this trust was broken? What led to it? And to that question, what role does the factory farming that is very badly perceived among customers, especially in the U.S., what role did it have on this trust being broken? And how to change that image towards the customer without compromising, obviously, on scale and profits to the industry. I guess that's one.
So David mentioned the people that are most disliked in the UK, and I think we could put bankers up on that list as well. I think one of the things happened is that there were some scandals. I mean, the unfortunate thing is, for all of the good that is happening in the industry, there are some bad operators. There are some people out there that are not doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And the really unfortunate thing is that that's what gets a lot of coverage. Those are the stories that get out there. And given that people are so far removed from where their food is being produced and what the majority of people are doing, they believe that what gets covered by the stories about those bad operators really is part of, maybe not the whole story, but I think that that's one of the things that contributed to that loss of trust.
Yeah, I think a failure in large institutions general, whether it be in baking, government, any industrialized entity, is viewed negatively by many consumers. Big is bad in general. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that the agricultural industry did something necessarily that you could pinpoint and say that's the moment where we lost trust. But certainly trust has eroded through some of our actions as an industry. And then as the consumer became more increasingly curious about how their food was produced, for too long we said, back off, it's really none of your business. I'll put it in the grocery store and you'll go buy it, right? And I'll put it at a price that's affordable, and that's all you need to worry about. And so by not engaging, then you created even more lack of trust. And so you reinforced a narrative that was right or wrong in their mind. So that'd be my long and short of it.
Yeah. And I think it's, if you look at the food industry in its widest sense, I mean, there's a really big issue at the moment for so-called big food. Like, big food equals bad food. And, you know, when you get the Director General of the World Health Organization, the indomitable Dr. Chan, saying big food is as bad as big tobacco or big soda, then you know you've got a problem. And what does that reflect? I think it's this, I saw the same in the meat industry. If I went back, say, 10, 12, 15 years ago in the US with the pork industry, where the pork producers and pork processors were in sort of denial, they were behind consumers. Consumers were moving on with regard to interest in production methods and processing methods, etc. And there was just denial. And so they were dragged screaming and kicking by very active groups who sometimes didn't play particularly fair. So this is a much wider problem. Big food, bad food. So big food, bad food was caught with its trousers down, so to speak. And you can see these small, quick on their feet startup food companies just doing really well out there in the marketplace, and they're being targeted now by big bad food, if you want to call them that, who want to buy them, support them, finance them, because they know that they've been too slow to get in the route that the small, quick on the feet ones have been doing. So I think we've got to just keep up with consumers. We've got to make sure that consumers are on the right track, and it is about communication.
Good. Well, as all good panels, in my experience, do, they run out of time before the good stuff ends, which I guess is better than running out of time long after the good stuff ended. So we are out of time. I have a housekeeping announcement after I thank you very much to our panelists. Join me in thanking them for